appearance. But with no further ado, I'll hand over to Nikki and really look forward to hearing what I hope will be, I'm sure will be, a really interesting and insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And good morning, everybody, and thank you for all joining us today. So I'm Nikki. I work for an environmental consultancy called DNV, and I head up sustainable finance. And I'm going to let each of my wonderful speakers today introduce themselves. So starting to my left, sorry if this is a bit crackly. João, would you like to give yourself an introduction? Sorry guys, technical issues.
Hello everyone, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here discussing such an important topic that's really relevant for us to promote finance in climate change. I'm João Teixeira. I'm currently Climate Transition Manager at Natura & Co. It's a Brazilian cosmetic brand, and I'm glad to be here with you all.
Thank you very much. And then starting off to my right, we have James from NatWest.
Yes, my name is James Close. I'm Head of Climate Change and Environment at NatWest Group, also a member of the UK's Transition Planning Task Force Working Group, as well as the GFAN Steering Group, trying to bring some harmonisation to all of this. And before I was at NatWest Group, I was the Director of Climate Change at the World Bank.
Thank you very much. And then we have Donna from CMS in Turkey, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure being here, and thank you for having me at this great panel. So I'm Donna Yalçın. I am the managing partner of CMS Turkey and partner in Austria. But my most important role, I would say, is being head of ESG and sustainability globally. And we were advisors to various COPs and looking forward to the upcoming COPs and supporting them to be delivered and hopefully have good results.
Thank you very much, everybody. So before we get into the actual specifics, I just want to start off by saying we have around 50-ish taxonomies which are developed or in development, which really is quite a large number and shows how far we're coming along. But before we get into our very, very specifics, I just want to know from each and every one of you, sorry, my headphones are going. Can I just have your take on why they've become such a hot topic, if you believe they have, in the recent years? So starting with yourself.
Yes, well, I think the finance part of investing in solutions of combating climate change is growing. I feel we're seeing that the topic has been a huge important aspect in COPs, and I think when we talk about the taxonomies in countries, is the way that we could also somehow organize and structure themselves for each country to be able to orientate financing in their specific development aspects, but also how they align with climate plans in each country, but again, how they all align somehow in a more broad world perspective that will help us all together to put this in practice, right?
Thank you very much. James.
Well, I think the challenge around the transition is the scale of finance that we're going to need to mobilise both for mitigation and adaptation. I think now it's clear that what the implications of the current position are, and how we're going to have to protect vulnerable people by getting finance into adaptation as well as pursuing the mitigation route. Now, all of that is extremely complicated. There's a huge number of variables that sit around it, and the first step, I think, is to be clear about the problem. The second step is to drive towards some harmonisation, and then the third step is to build standardisation. And I think that the 50 taxonomies is a good way of setting out the problem, and then converging those is going to be really extremely important. And I think one of my fellow bankers said that they were in support of a good taxonomy, but not in support of a bad taxonomy. And I think that's the judgment that we need to make as the providers of finance. And that's then, I think, the steer that we can get from driving towards this harmonisation and standardisation.
Thank you very much, James. And I think we can all agree that there's been a lot of conversations this week around climate change adaptation that we can do there as well. Donna.
Yeah, I mean, being also a representative for the private sector, I would say it is really about clarity, right? Mm-hmm. Complexity is increasing, so investors need more and more clarity, right? We need to prevent all sorts of washing, be it green, blue, or pink, right? And others, I'm sure there are others too. And this is why we need standards to tell us which economic activities are really pink, blue, and green, right? Mm-hmm. And this is why I think the number of these, so to say, taxonomies are increasing, especially because countries also want to provide, so to say, a proper investment field for cross-border investors. Mm.
So really what we're saying here is that there's been a need for some guidance. There's been a need to actually start supporting with standardization. But really ultimately now we have quite a plethora coming along the way to actually support our different actors in the ecosystem. We're looking for some convergence. Okay, now we're going to get into the fun questions, guys. James, you get the pleasure to go first. I know. So, from being in the finance sector and from a banking background, as well as your many other roles, which you've just given us some indication with, would really like to get your take on the usefulness of taxonomies. So, within the debt capital market space in particular, how are you seeing taxonomies being applied in emerging and developing economies?
Yeah, well, I think I'd start off with the work that we did at the World Bank, and if you recall, ahead of Paris, there was a commitment for the World Bank for 28% of its finance to be climate finance, and at the time we had a sort of rough methodology that kind of generally pointed to what climate finance was, and then we tightened that up and made sure that it was consistent with what the OECD were recording effectively as part of the 100 billion. And then what we looked to do was kind of mainstream that through the way in which we were providing our lending to developing and emerging markets. And I think all that's fine, but that's the heavily concessional finance. We know that we have to turn the billions of heavily concessional finance into the trillions of private finance. Yep. And we need a mechanism to enable us to do that. And as a bank, our balance sheet is limited through the capital that we hold, and so we're very enthusiastic about the prospect of being the facilitators of this finance. And in order to do that, we need to know where the pools of finance sit and what they're looking for. And we've got a lot of really interesting finance directed towards ESG and towards emerging markets. And then we need to be able to figure out how we're going to tap into that through the instruments that you talked about, whether it's blue, green, or pink's a new one on me, but I quite like that one. But of course we need consistency, because if you're buying one of these bonds, and if you need to know how it's being applied. So finance is no longer completely fungible. So I think we're building the architecture of a new financial system here, because the current financial system works in the current constraints of the economy, and is also its risk perspective is based on a backward look rather than a forward look. And I think as we face into the climate challenge, we're going to have to much more look at this forward look. So that's why we need well-informed taxonomies that are going to enable us to label products and get the finance to where it needs to be, to make sure that we're managing risk throughout the whole system, both emerging markets and developed markets, and across all of the systems within the economy, whether that's the energy system, the mobility system, the food system. I think that's also then needs to be linked back to how we price risk.
Okay.
So there's a huge amount in all of this, but you've got to start somewhere. Transition plans help, transition finance and definitions of that and the next step, and then taxonomies are the way we ultimately codify it.
Okay, so really, again, we're going back to that consistency with a guidance and a blueprint, which is also applicable in not just our developed economies, but our emerging markets as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And also, just thinking about that, do you think there's a gap to be filled in the current taxonomies which we're seeing today?
Well, I think the underlying premise is around what we're trying to achieve, and that's when I think some of the limitations around taxonomies become apparent, because they start to become political.
Yeah.
Whereas actually we need them to be much more science-based and science-oriented, and I think that's when we can see the benefit of having the Paris Agreement, the NDCs, investable plans for individual countries, and then the mobilization of finance. And getting that alignment in a way that is consistent with a scientific view, I think, could be really very helpful. If it's compromised too much by a political view, then I think that makes it quite challenging.
So it's really as well getting those right stakeholders to start talking more on the actual implementation.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Now, moving on to Donna. Given that you advise companies on the potential changes in the regulatory space, can you share with us your insights and reflections on what are the primary challenges you're seeing with EMD companies as they're trying to actually apply these taxonomies into practice?
Good. I will start with the short answer and then give a bit content to that. So there are 3 keywords here: harmonization, because of fragmented regulation.
Yep.
Then you have capacity building, that's an issue, and definitely technology, right? So that's the third one. So what do I mean with that? I mean, it is great that we have so many taxonomies. However, it is even more greater, so to say, or better if they talk to each other, right?
Yeah.
And if they mean really the same. So the labeling is the same. This will make investors' lives much easier, and also, so to say, companies located in the EMDE space, so to say, in region, because they have already limited funding, limited budgets, problems with technology and capacity, that they, so to say, adopt to these regulations, so to say, easier, right? So that's one thing, the regulatory complexity. So harmonization would be great there. Although it's not, so to say, a typical answer of a lawyer, right? So because more complexity creates more work for us, but nevertheless. So the second thing is definitely capacity. So, and we talked about at the COP28 a lot about capacity. What does this mean? We need more skilled people who understand taxonomies. They are not that easy. The EU taxonomy is one of the most complex ones, right? So we're advising clients over and over again, right? And even we are challenged, and we should be our so-called experts on that, right? And therefore, that's an issue. So we need more skill sets, more skilled people, more experts to navigate through these, so to say, challenges, and understanding the taxonomies better, and technology, because the data is very, very important.
Oh, data.
Right. So it's
I think that's a constant theme, that one.
Exactly. So, and that's another issue. We need, and these companies especially need proper data management systems, right? And we need adapting taxonomies. That's another issue, because climate change and the facts and the needs are evolving, right? So what means, so to say, sustainable today might not be sustainable tomorrow, and so on and so forth. So that's another thing. And although I mentioned these challenges, it's still important for these companies located, so to say, in this region to adapt, right, and to have these standardization and to push them forward towards capacity building, opening up markets for them and creating and bringing in investments.
Okay, I mean, that's really helpful, and particularly we're going to be coming onto the corporate perspective in a moment. Just thinking about that, given the fact that we have a need to upskill, what are your solutions? I mean, any of you, like, do you have a view on that? We have the same conversations in consultancy all the time and are constantly having to deliver training. You know, is there an easy way? Can technology or digital solutions help distill that information to give the upskilling to apply this in practice?
I think so. So
Okay.
I would say technology is definitely a very, very important thing. And there is a good saying, sharing is caring, right? So sharing best practices, knowledge, right? Opening up everything, not keeping it for yourself. And really, because we share a common pain,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
And the common challenge is crucial to fight and to enable this transition, to so to say, and fight this challenge.
Well, I'm a bit more old-fashioned than the technology answer, although it has a role to play. And I think in the UK we've done a really nice job of building the Transition Planning Task Force, which was a partnership between government and business and NGOs. And the community of practice involved in that spread to 150 odd people, preparing some really high quality guidance for preparation of transition plans. And the same principle has been taken forward in the Transition Finance Market Review with an expert group. Again, a really good report created by Vanessa Harvard-Williams that is a brilliant starting point. So I think in the UK now we have, I don't know, there's probably 30 of my peers in banks who are promoting this within their own organisations. I've got a team of 5 or 6 people, they're all really interested in this and focusing on it. So you build a whole network within the whole financial community, and that deepens the understanding and enables us to think about how we develop and take forward some of these taxonomies. And again, I think you need to get a broad range of perspectives as well. So that's why I think the NGOs have an important role to play as well.
Absolutely, thank you. And anything to add from the corporate side?
Yeah, I think well, climate change is already a topic that is not easy to discuss outside of our rooms here. And when we go to finance, it's even harder because you are mixing two topics that are very complex, and the way that they need to go down to the people who are building those strategies on company, on the private sector is really a challenging topic. In Brazil is going to launch its taxonomy on Saturday here at the COP, and it's also combined with the whole scenario of the climate plan and the investment platform that Brazil is also launching. But this is somehow built up, taking behind the NDC and how the whole transformation in Brazil will gonna be made. And I think the topic of education, the sectors that are comprised in those plans and those strategies, they need to have their sectorial associations and maybe bring this down to the companies and how they can understand and articulate with the finance sector to bring the much needed investment.
Thank you. I mean, it's great to hear the fact that you're actually, congratulations on the fact that the taxonomy is hopefully going to be launched on Saturday, and the implementation, if I remember rightly, was 2026 for it to be mandatory.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a really exciting development. I think what's really interesting there is, you've alluded to the fact that trade associations have a role, those industry groups, and coming together to then help corporates to actually understand what to do in practice. So rather than every single individual corporation trying to do this on their own, there is a way in which we can get some harmonization there, some consistency, and some best practice to support you along the way. Thank you. But coming to you now, from a corporate based in Brazil, are you seeing the necessary investment flows going to where they should actually be going to?
Not yet.
Okay. I mean, if not, then do you think the taxonomy, which is coming out in a few days, is going to help?
I think it will help, of course. We have seen that the government has been building up this whole program, and again, I totally agree that it shouldn't be political. It should be a macro plan for the country, for its development, and how it should be developed in a way that foresees the whole country, the people, and the development and the adaptation, of course, that we also have been seeing that is much needed as well. In terms of the corporate view on that, We have been trying to implement an agroforestry system in the north of Brazil that is for planting palm trees with cocoa and so on. And it's a pretty incredible project that has a low footprint for palm oil and cocoa, and also it's somehow more resilient for the climate crisis events. But again, how we adapt the financing of these structures, and because in Brazil we also have some very huge problems regarding land tenure, and somehow those taxonomy bring more clarity for what they should be invested in and how they can be oriented for such important projects like this one. You understand that the thing is somehow some projects need to adapt, or the finance sector should adapt to the solutions that we have been seeing in the ground, and somehow I think that the taxonomy will help investor have more clarity that this type of project is the right one to be implemented in finance.
Okay, so there's also there an alignment really from the, you're hoping that sector guidance to actually start bringing you along with where you should be going, where the investments need to be aligned to the NDCs, and also on top of that, having a bit of a blueprint there. But I guess, I'd be really interested from yourselves to give some advice or your reflections of maybe some experiences of the challenges to be aware of when it comes to implementing this.
Well, I think the nature side is really, really interesting, and I think from the climate side, we know we can measure carbon dioxide, so you can kind of work out what taxonomy elements have in terms of impact. In nature, there are so many variables. Yeah. So when you start to think about impact, which bits of your taxonomy feed into the benefits that nature can bring in terms of carbon dioxide, but also in terms of resilience and adaptation as well. And also, we forget that we're actually doing this to make people's lives better and for communities to thrive. So you've got to factor that in as well. So it starts to, the challenge almost is how do you kind of open it up and then close it back down, but never lose sight of the fact of what you're trying to achieve. And I wouldn't presume to give you any advice, but the observation I think around, for example, some of the funds that I used to be responsible for at the World Bank was that the capacity building for jurisdictional REDD+ and protecting forests is so important, and the role that indigenous people have to play, I think, is very significant. And I'm actually really excited about COP in Brazil next year, because I think the voice of the Brazilians will really take forward some of these discussions in productive ways.
And
yeah, I think, I can only echo what was said already, capacity. So each and every taxonomy really released, I don't know how rigid the taxonomies are not, so we will see. There are different ways to approach it, right? And we will talk about it later, but a very, very clear understanding of skill setting and building up the skills is very, very important. We see especially also, and not only in the, so to say, private sector, but also public sector, especially also with authorities, and those who should, so to say, see or check compliance or not, are really lacking behind in this respect, unfortunately.
I mean, have you, from when you've had the draft and you're looking at the way you're then going to be reporting, moving down the line and collecting data, are you feeling there are any challenges? You're a large organisation as well, there are smaller companies out there.
Yeah, of course, data is a huge complexity. Not even if you think just in terms of traceability, it's already a huge challenge in terms of how the commodities in Brazil will be somehow compliant with zero deforestation. Yeah. And this is somehow what aligns to it. When we are trying to build up a project and thinking about, especially in the impact that we will have in society and nature, you should really push forward the methodologies and so on. We at Natura, we co-develop a methodology called IPNL, Integrated Profit and Loss, that somehow tries to measure the social capital, the human capital, and the natural capital, based, of course, not primary data, when we can we have it, but not always we can do this. But it's a way that we can somehow measure the impact of this type of project. An agroforestry system that builds capacity in the ground, helps income for the farmers, is more resilient to climate events. It's getting regenerating degraded lands that were abandoned cattle fields. So it's an incredible project, and how we can try to measure all those impacts in terms of natural capital, social capital, and human capital, and bring this to a unified KPI that you can somehow comprehend more easily what is the impact of this type of project. And then you somehow can try to adapt it to the taxonomy definitions and understand if they fit or not. So we are trying to help them as well to put somehow more specific topics that we understand that will help deliver finance with more impact on the ground.
So really having that top-down, bottom-up approach to get some alignment. Time's going to be telling, but thank you for sharing that. So we've had a bit of an insight there with regards to some of the current challenges, some of the current state of play, but what about moving forward? And that's really where I would like us to focus the next half of this discussion. And starting with yourself, James. I know. So obviously you have to deal a lot with cross-border investors, and we know that there are efforts from the likes of the UNEPFI, CBI, PRI, so many acronyms, so I do apologise, guys, to really try and create to have a taxonomy platform in place. And that's really one to try and encourage that wonderful word we keep hearing this week, the interoperability across all taxonomies and regionally. Now, I'm just wondering, do you think this is the right way forward, or do you think we should be having some form of global baseline? And I know you've touched upon some views earlier.
Yeah, well, I think, you've really hit on the challenge of planned economy versus market economy. Yeah. And I think somehow we've got to reconcile those two in a way that's going to work, which is, what does that new system, how does it evolve to be? I mean, we don't want something that's completely centrally planned because it will never work, and we'll be Soviet tractor building, and it'll be completely, everything will be not in time, and there will be no need for it. I mean, so the inefficiencies of that are enormous, but at the same time we can't just leave it to a market that doesn't really price the externalities. Yeah. So I think there's some foundational things that are really important. We talk a lot about a carbon tax or a carbon price being one of the enablers of the future system and the way it develops. And of course, there's an ever-increasing carbon price across the economy. And then I think, but you need to fill gaps, and I think that's where. Again, I try and break it down into the building blocks that are needed, and I think everybody's putting their building blocks out there. Yeah. Somehow we've got to arrange them in a way that they become interlocked, so sort of interoperability point of view, but also build upwards as well, so that we have, at the end of the day, a financial architecture that's going to work. So we need the regulators on board as well. We need it to link it to capital and how capital is going to flow. And then we also need it to the different stripes of finance in the capital stack as well. So, it probably looks slightly different for equity because they're taking a slightly different risk than it does for debt, where debt's looking for more security and more certainty around it. So there's just a lot of things to hold together in our minds. And I think the best way to think about a taxonomy is that it gives us some structure to enable us to do that. It isn't the answer to everything, but it is definitely one of the foundational building blocks that takes us forward to build that new international financial architecture that's going to work. And I think we hear a lot in our engagement with investors and our fixed income providers, and the asset owners in particular are looking to make sure that there is an alignment with our commitments and that we're really getting a liability matching. I mean, they're paying out to their pension fund holders in 20, 30 years' time. As if we're investing in things that are going to undermine that, then what's the point? At the same time, we're needing to make our returns for our investors, and so the balance, it strikes me, is around making sure we're doing the environmental and sustainability and governance activities in a really robust way, but also we're starting to demonstrate how that feeds into building a better balance sheet and a better business over the long term. And then we'll get the benefits with our ESG investors, but also the equity investors who, we're all driven by that need to produce returns. And again, this foundational architecture, I think, can really help have that conversation in a more constructive way.
So again, I think it's really helpful for us all to just kind of take that step back and think about the different components of what does sometimes come across as an incredibly complex system, and to really think about, you have layers here from the taxonomy as a blueprint with the guidance, and then really thinking about the implementation and that guidance and how you can bring people along board. Thank you very much for that, James. Really do appreciate it. Okay. So, Donna, just thinking around, we've got around 16 different jurisdictions prioritizing their taxonomies. Do you think that the taxonomy should have a principles-based approach, or should they be more prescriptive?
Okay, asking this question to a lawyer, you get the lawyer's answer.
This is what I'm really excited about.
The lawyer would always say, it depends, right? So, now giving content to that a bit. So having clear, of course, principle-based, so to say, or prescriptive, more prescriptive, so to say, taxonomies create clarity, right? And we love clarity.
Yeah.
So, but the problem is that they are very rigid too, because they are clear, or hopefully they are clear, because we have some principle-based or perspective-based taxonomies, which are unfortunately, when we apply them, not that clear either. But leave that aside. So they are rigid, right? Yeah. And when you are sitting in a developing country or emerging country, sometimes this rigidness or restrictiveness limits you, because you need to adapt, right? You need to develop. This means that your data is maybe not there. Your technology is not there, right? Your asset capacity is not there. So therefore, this rigidness could be a barrier for, so to say, companies located in emerging and developing countries because of their, so to say, limited infrastructure. So then looking at, so to say, more principle-based taxonomies, they provide flexibility, right? So they adapt or can adapt to the local needs, right? And to the local infrastructure and the environment. So this is why it makes them, so to say, maybe at the first glance more proper and fit for purpose in these countries. However, as James said, there is a big risk of taxonomies becoming political, right? If they're not rigid and leave, so to say, a lot of room for interpretation, so to say, coming from a lawyer's lens again, that could be difficult. So I think the best approach might be, and this might be an answer which is true now but not true tomorrow, is a balanced approach, right? And so to say a cherry picking, if you want to put it that way, of both, so to say, systematics and methodologies, and having, so to say, a good hybrid solution, combining the clearness with the flexibility and as much as possible.
And do you think that's achievable, having such a hybrid approach? No, it's something I think we would all love to see happening, but there are so many different factors.
So that's the difficult question, right? So that's a pain point. I think it is not that easy at the moment. As said, even the clear taxonomies have their problems and their challenges. And the more unclear they get, the more difficulties rise. But at the same time, we need to be careful of not overheating the systems, right? Yeah. So we're bringing a lot of burden to, again, businesses, but also, so to say, the to the authorities by, so to say, expecting standards which they can't live up to and can't deliver. right? And that's another issue I see, that these, as said, overheating of the systems creates additional barriers and difficulties. And I think the biggest enemy we have in all of this is time, right? We are hearing it's the hottest year ever, right? The climate is changing rapidly. We, as the global north, are affected heavily, right? Because Europe's, the impact of climate on Europe is immense.
Yep.
So I think there is a huge responsibility sitting on the shoulders of the global north to help the global south, so to say, to develop with any methodology we can provide to them and help them with.
James, I feel like you've got a role.
Yeah, no, I was just going to offer a reflection, I suppose, really, which is in two parts, I suppose. The last COP, I chaired a meeting on transition finance, and as I was sitting there, I was kind of totaling up the amount of commitments that these banks had made to sustainable finance, and it was somewhere in the region of $3 trillion. But I'm not sure anybody could really say exactly what that meant. And I was feeling a little bit sort of embarrassed, because our figure that we'd put into this was £100 million of climate and sustainable finance and funding. But the way we started off with a pretty principles-based approach, and we based effectively, and I think you'll like this, Donna, a sort of case law almost, which said, well, okay, let's figure out how we're going to think about this type of asset class, and is it really reducing emissions, or is it substituting for something else? And we started to turn, I think, principles into something that was a bit more prescriptive. So when we first started doing this, we used to have meetings that lasted 2 hours with 2 hours prep and 2 hours follow-up. Now we do these things in half an hour, because we've established the precedent, the business knows, and we've got some real sense of convergence. And all the way through, I've been very, very convinced that we've got a really compelling and impactful story to tell that is in no way misleading, because we've done this with a degree of rigor that has enabled us to build over time efficiency into it. But you have to put the investment up front to A, develop the right principles, and B, to figure out how you're going to apply them, and C, to codify them in a way that becomes more and more useful over time.
And also able to be flexible when you're going from one country to another.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Finally, so taking all of that, no pressure on yourself there, and noting that you've got your taxonomy coming out in Brazil hopefully on Saturday, so I hope we can all keep an eye out for that. Taking on board what's been said here, what do you think is actually going to be useful and effective in Brazil when that taxonomy comes out? Like, what do you need as a corporation? Sorry, just realised that might have slipped there. So sorry, just say that, repeat that in case no one heard. So seeing that Brazil is going to be launching its taxonomy, with it coming into force properly by 2026, what do you think is going to be useful to be fully effective in Brazil? I know we've touched upon some elements, but thinking about yourselves, and maybe also some of the SMEs who are operating in there, who are less established.
Okay. Well, I think that there are some critical elements that should be in place in terms of social safeguards and social environmental guardrails that need to be in place. In Brazil, we have a huge potential for energy transition. We have 90% of our electric grid is already renewable. We are having huge amount of investment looking to green hydrogen that can be produced there. We have a huge potential in terms of also leading the transition in the South Global. And we need to understand that this taxonomy should be in place not only to promote all those evolutions, but also ensuring that there won't be any social negative impact, but as well actually positive impact, generating employees and so on, employment. And I really think that when we look to SMEs and so on, this type of matching with principles and and being very clear is a pretty good approach to be, but we couldn't, how can I say, the timing, as you mentioned, is pretty important because somehow the standards, not only in taxonomy but also GG protocol, SBTI, they are not at the top of their evolution. They are still being developing, but we need information now. We need guidelines now to be in place and also to adapt and understand how the finance will be will be implemented, but ensuring that all those types will be have integrity when the impact is being generated in the field. How we can really communicate the real impact in the terms of guaranteeing integrity as well.
So really, I'm just thinking about that, and funny enough, I was actually talking to some lawyers last week. We were really thinking about the practicalities of distilling information and communicating that. And when you're putting it out there, like, is there a way to have a simple how-to guide to just try and make this operable? You know, it's a golden question. Everybody would love that. You know, do you think there's some kind of key takeaways that if people are waiting or trying to distill that information in EMDEs about how to actually integrate and implement these taxonomies into practice?
I mean, I think we all love simplification.
Yep.
Until it becomes too simple and simplistic.
Complexity and simplicity.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe I think we have to live with this balance and try and find a way of simplifying things without making them simplistic. And again, I think there's a really important role for guidance and trying to look for the 80-20 rule. 80% of stuff we kind of know fits into the bucket. 20% is the hard bit, and let's figure it out. But let's figure it out in a way that really forces us to think about the impact that we have of those decisions that we're making, and the benefits that, you know, bringing it into the more harmonized approach that relates to transition, for example, and actually be really robust about rejecting the things that don't. But there's whatever we do, we're going to end up with an element of judgment around it.
Yeah.
It's impossible to avoid it, and that's why you need, you know, smart people committing to this, working together and collaborating in a framework that enables us to take what we've learned and apply it.
Absolutely. So, I would like to ask one more thing of you guys, and I know I've not asked this in advance. If there's one message to take away today or to give to our audience, noting that the time is now, we need to be acting, it's a giant issue on here, and we really want to be mobilizing finance to EMDEs. From yourselves, from your role within the ecosystem, what would it be?
Okay, I may start. Hear me? No? Yes?
Perfect.
Yes, maybe? Okay, good. So I think it's really about collaboration. So real collaboration, not just collaboration for marketing purposes. So we really need to sit together, share best practices. As said, my theme would be sharing is caring. And really trying to, I don't know, yes. The best people together who have the expertise, right, sit together and have all stakeholders together to really create solutions. And simplicity, I love that, right, not for the sake of simplicity, because, but it makes sometimes things faster. And as said, we are fighting against time.
Yeah.
Simplify, harmonize, stroke standardize, accelerate.
Perfect.
Oh, that sounds always
If there's anything to add, as a corporate, you know, we were speaking about data earlier as well.
Yeah, yeah. I really think that collaboration is the issue, but as well, how to harmonize it with all standards and guarantee that all of these will be having an impact in the ground, and communicating that for me is crucial. So combining the view that the climate change is a human topic for our civilians, right, so survivor, and I really understand that we are at the moment that the economy is becoming a different part, and working and investing in climate solution, transition, adaptation is the new business. This is the way that market will need to go, and understand that this is the way for us to still be living in this planet, right?
Thank you very much. Well, thank you everybody for a wonderful discussion and your answers shared. If it's okay, just checking on my time, we might have a time for a couple of questions. Do feel free to try and grab everybody after us and messages. But first of all, thank you to Fiona as well, and thank you to each of the panelists for your answers. Now, I'm hoping this has been helpful for yourselves and probably got a lot of questions to ask. So if you can just raise your hand if you do have a question, and we'll try and take a couple before we have to end the session. Do we have a microphone? Thank you. Okay. If you could stand up and just introduce yourself as well, that would be fantastic.
Okay, thank you. My name is Kojo. I come from Niger, and I'm working with a local organization, Action for Development of Sahel. First of all, I thank the panelists for a brilliant explanation, and most especially I want to say to Donna that her glasses are great on her.
They are fantastic, aren't they? When I first saw her, I was like, they are rocking.
Thank you. That's too kind.
To them, and I have two questions. The first one to Donna, because she said emerging and developing economies, they need to build their capacity, and also they need technology. It is true, we need to build our capacity and to have a transfer of technology, but we need also to enlighten the local practice that we have, because in emerging and developing economy, they have practice that they used to do. And if we can enlighten their practice, it will be okay, because if we want to build international, global fighting against climate change, we must start locally. We must start locally. And also, I want to know if you have, because you have talked about which kind of economy, blue, white, or pink we have. In your case, your structure, what kind of economy you use, and how can the emerging and developing economy can beneficiate from that? My second question is for
If it's, can we just quickly take that first one?
And you said about build a new finance system. If we need to build a new finance system, that means the old one is we have failed in the old ones. Or what can we do? Or have you make a evaluation about the old one to know where we have done good or bad to build another one? It is what I want to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who would like to start first?
Well, I'm happy. You know, it's a brilliant. I mean, I think the old one, I would say, has failed. It's been in many ways extremely successful. I mean, it's kind of taken, you know, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. It's kind of created this extraordinary economy in which we live. But like everything, it has to evolve. And you know, somebody who's on the front line of climate change, we need to figure out how to get the money to you, and that's what this COP's about, is beating the NQCG. And of course, it's in all of our interests to do that, because we'll all benefit from it. And I was having dinner last night with Lord Nick Stern, who reminded us that it was 20 years ago he did his Stern report, and the economics of climate change are obvious. You know, we massively benefit from reducing emissions and creating a more stable climate. The financing of it is more complicated, and that's where we need to be smart around how we get that financing to where it needs to be to deliver the economic benefits that come from the transition.
Okay, it's my turn. Oh my God. We will continue later, so to say, with the discussion, because the question is really takes a day, I think. So thank you for the compliment first for my glasses. Second, I mean, you're absolutely right. So what I mean with really capacity building and also technology transfer doesn't mean to, so to say, disregard local, the local environment. There is no one-size-fits-all approach, not at all. So we need to learn, of course, the best practices and highlight them and build around them, right? And accelerate and scale them. That's very, very important. So I'm happy that you asked this question, so maybe I would have misunderstood otherwise. And the second thing is really, I mean, when it comes to capacity building, this is anyhow something you don't copy-paste. You look at merging, so to say, capacities, right? With again, getting in the local flavor. That's very, very important and crucial there too. So therefore, again, no one-size-fits-all approach, right? Local differences are very, very crucial and important. When it comes to different types of economy, oh my God, that's a really difficult question. So I think what I could say is, we are not talking about this at all, but unfortunately, the global north, although we have the wealth, right, and the technology and everything, we made mistakes. We are now there where we are because we didn't plan this in the nature and the climate, so to say, impacts we are creating. So, and now we're trying to solve this problem, and also we can only achieve that all together. So therefore, the question which type of, so to say, methodology, structure, economical setup would help is another very, very long discussion. So I think, again, this brings me back to learning from failures of others, learning from the best practices of others, and really sharing and cooperating and being frank, brave, and open, right?
Anything to add from a corporate perspective? You're okay? Okay. One more, if it's a short question. And if not, we can wrap up.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to give you a question, and thanks for all the panelists for a great debate, and for Nikki for moderating this great debate. I would like to ask, we talk about time is the enemy, as was said before. So when we have many colors, many local practices, no copy-paste I hear now, where is the scalability? And I would like to, from a corporate lens, what makes you go faster in transitioning to more sustainable practices? Is it one way, or is it many ways? What gives you the speed?
Totally many ways, several ways we can say. I think the corporate, the private sector itself has an aspect that they somehow can combine or orient it in a more easy way, because somehow there is a unified direction that we are putting forward as a company. But again, we need to, we are not alone. We need to combine. We need to, like, when we are talking about this type of project that I was mentioning, the first one, we need to understand how government will help us the question of land tenure, or the compliance, environmental compliance of the land, but also bringing instrumental of financing systems, or reducing taxes, incentivizing. So it's a combined, that it's a very holistic way to that we are not alone on that, but we somehow can maybe, well, with KPIs and help assess a sustainability-linked loan that is more oriented to a specific goal that is also related to a sustainability vision. So somehow it's a straightforward thinking, but well, we need a very broad perspective on that. It's not only a question of private sector being faster than the other. I think it's we are all together on this journey, right?
Okay, well, that's the end of our session. So thank you all for sitting patiently, listening in, and do obviously provide your feedback if needed, but if there are any questions, do obviously let us all know. Thank you, and thank you very much to all the speakers on this panel today, and for Fiona for hosting. Cheers, guys.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you very much.